We've delivered millions and millions and tens of millions of masks all over. So you don't hear about that anymore. You don't hear about hospital beds. When I first started, everyone was talking, oh, hospital beds, hospital beds. You don't hear about ventilators. You don't hear about masks. And you shouldn't be hearing about testing.
So PPE has been sporadic, but it's been manageable. And we do what we have to do. We're nurses.
Sporadic for you, but not sporadic for a lot of other people.
Oh, no, I agree, Mr. President.
Because Absolutely. I've heard the opposite.
All right, so at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, the Trump administration, which you just saw there on your screen, tried to convince us that they actually had secured enough masks, gowns, tests, and ventilators to help the country battle COVID. But photos of nurses using garbage bags and pool noodles as PPE told a different story. A new book by ProPublica's David McSwain pulls back the curtain, showing just how desperately the Trump administration had to scramble for medical supplies and just how much money they handed over to eager opportunists looking to take advantage of the situation along the way. Quote, various federal agencies would claim they vetted thousands of private contractors who emerged to reap the benefits of our devastation, but story after story would prove this was a lie. The stories in McSwain's book are so outlandish that they'd be funny if they weren't actually true. One firm hired by FEMA to deliver testing supplies had formed that very week, and the founder had earlier been accused of fraud. Instead of delivering tubes, the company conspired to deliver unusable, contaminated plastic mini soda bottles thrown together with shovels in a nondescript warehouse. And according to McSwain, they got away with over $10 million. In total, McSwain says, these snake oil salesmen billed the Trump administration out of billions of dollars. Again, it would almost be funny, but with so many Americans dying because of that kind of incompetence and slow response, it's infuriating. Joining me now is David McSwain, reporter for ProPublica and the author of Pandemic Inc., Chasing the Capitalists and the Thieves Who Got Rich While We Got Sick. David, thank you so much for joining us. I've been really looking forward to this interview for some time. You write, it is unfathomable that either Presidents George W. Bush or Barack Obama would have handled the pandemic as poorly as Trump did. But you also make it clear that our institutions and our supply chains were also unprepared for the pandemic, independent of the Trump administration. So what could the response have looked like with a different president in charge? How much better could it have been? We'll start with that.
Yeah, that's right. So going back to about 2010, the Tea Party battles, the Republicans mounted against everything Barack Obama wanted to do. We began to defund the Strategic National Stockpile and really not heed the warnings of scientists and various government agencies. So you have that compounded with the Trump administration, which had sort of systematically disrespected and dismantled bureaucracy itself. So by the time COVID hit, we had something like 1% of what we needed in the Strategic National Stockpile to address just that first wave in terms of masks and gloves and so forth. And we had to get moving. The Trump administration had tried to deny this pandemic. By the time they caught up to it, the solution was just to throw money out to anyone and everyone who said they had masks and whatever it is we needed.
So when you read up about the Kushner kids, one of the most absurd and infuriating parts of your book, it was bizarre to see how much influence they had in this process. Can you describe this motley crew for viewers who haven't heard of them?
Sure. This had been reported at the time. There was a lot of sort of palace intrigue about it. But I spent some time with the Navy admiral who was sort of plucked from the Department of Defense and stood up, sent over to FEMA to get a handle on things. And he found himself sort of being the adult in the room, trying to, he understood supply chains. He'd been doing it for decades and was trying to route things where they needed to go. And all the while there is Jared Kushner, who's making headlines. He's bringing his friends in, these well-to-do people who knew nothing about government and how to, use government money. And he eventually said, well, all right, we got to put these guys on the sideline and just have them comb through these absurd inquiries they're getting from contractors who claim they have things. And the way he tells it, they weren't ultimately that consequential, but they created a lot of ill will. Yeah. And, referred contractors to people like the state of New York who couldn't deliver and just kind of wasted everybody's time. It was just a total mess.
Fascinating. I mean, I also know that you write not just about those who pledged to track down life-saving equipment, but on the other side of it, those who fraudulently took government relief money once Congress passed that. The Department of Justice announced a COVID-19 fraud task force to investigate that. In your best-case scenario, how bad or how should the bad actors described in your book be held accountable?
Yeah, accountability is just an interesting question overall when you think about this pandemic, which still drags on and is, a trauma for all of us. A few people, those contractors in those early months, which I detail in Pandemic Inc., the book, they've been charged. One of the main characters has been convicted and is in prison. But when you talk about the pandemic, when you talk about the Paycheck Protection Program and those who fleeced unemployment benefits, the Department of Justice is catching up to these, and each and every one of those is its own case that involves investigation and ultimately litigation. We're going to be catching up to this for years, and I don't think anyone truly understands the scope, but it's big.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, any chance to quantify how much we're talking about in terms of fraudulent use of the PPP program?
Yeah, I wish I could give you an answer to that.
Yeah, I know
so it's
tough.
an $800 billion program, largely forgivable. There were a few people who were so outlandish buying Rolls Royces and yachts and mansions that they've been caught. But we're going to be trying to quantify this for a long time. I think something like 500 people have already been charged and counting.
I wanted to ask you about like a broader theme in the book, because in it you say that you had faith we would come together as a country to fight this pandemic. Our inadequate stockpile and technical unpreparedness for the pandemic aside, what has changed in our country that prevented us from coming together in that way that we like to think of ourselves uniting when we're faced with this kind of like existential crisis, whether it be World War II or post 9/11 or what have you?
Wow, that's a big question. And, the videos you played at the
you only have a minute to answer it. No,
it put me back in a headspace. I forgot how silly the administration was, and just acknowledging that we needed stuff. I think the ultimate question is we've forgotten how to talk to each other in good faith. I have no interest in partisan journalism. I don't think it's very useful. In fact, I think it's destructive. And this was something that was pretty simple. We just needed stuff, and we needed to take care of each other, and we forgot how to do that. And that really permeated everything. And we just forgot how to do good governance. And I don't know how to fix that. I sure wish I did.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible book. A lot of incredible details about there. Let me ask you really quickly, finally, if I can, David, you described how the idea for this book actually came to be following someone on a private jet trying to desperately fulfill an order. Tell us a little bit about this story and the genesis of this book.
Right. Yeah. So in those early weeks, I was here in D.C. trying to figure out my place in, the largest story of our lives, and decided to follow the money, and noticed that contractors who'd never had a big deal, or they had no footprint really, were getting huge contracts. And I noticed that the Veterans Administration, which oversees the largest hospital network in the country, had given a $34.5 million contract to Robert Stewart Jr. And I just decided to call him and ask, how do you have these 6 million N95s? No one seems to have them. And he said,
right.
I'm the real deal. I have them. I'm hopping on a private jet. And next thing you know, I'm on this jet in the morning. And as we're taking off, he finally reveals, well, I don't actually have masks. And so began 2 years of just wild reporting.
Right. All right, David McSwain, fascinating reporting, incredible reporting, important reporting. Thank you so much for the book. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, the book is Pandemic Inc., Chasing the Capitalists and Thieves Who Got Rich While We Got Sick.